is upon us. It's a time that begs us to reflect, to refocus, to restart, to recommit, to rethink, to renew, to reawaken. It shines really, the new year does, as a mirror on our lives, and it reminds us of all the things we didn't do that we hope to do, of all the places we should have gone that remain unvisited, of all the things we wish we were and that we are not. New Year is a season of self-analysis and self-absorption. The commercials that you see on TV, you know what they're all about, right? Lose weight. I hope so this year, my brother. Lose weight. Get fit. You know, we all want to lose those holiday pounds that we put on. And we work so hard to get those pounds off, don't we? You know, you can work for months to lose pounds, and like in over a weekend, you put them all back on. How does that work? How does that? Maybe it's because I'm over 50. I don't know. Just asking. New Year's is all about making improvements to ourselves. Let me ask you real quick. How many of you have already started making your New Year's resolutions? Anybody? See, again, you all setting the bar really low, right? So you don't have to live up to anything. You know, just like really low, just keeping an even keel. Okay. Any of you make a resolution you can pay off all the credit card debt you just accumulated for Christmas? Anybody do that? Many of us approach the new year by making promises to ourselves that we're going to get better. It is a season of self-improvement. It is a time to make a better version of you. We make promises to lose weight, to get in shape, to go to church more, to stop a bad habit, to get out of debt, and so on and so on. We basically ask ourselves this question: what should I do about me? What should I do about me? How do I make me a better version of me? And that's not a bad question. I'm not going to criticize you for asking it. I think it's a fair question. But I want us to consider a better question. And I'm going to start this sermon really as a beginning to a sermon series that I'll be starting next week. So you can kind of consider this message as the prequel to the real series that starts next week. Our text comes from Nehemiah. Let me give you a little background, a little history lesson on Nehemiah, because we're going to be there for a few weeks. Basically, this takes place in a time that's known as the Jewish exile. It's a time when the Jews have been taken by the Babylonians out of Jerusalem, and they've been made slaves in Babylon. It's about 605 BC. And then they're in captivity to the Babylonians. 70 years goes by. And then the Persians come in and they overthrow the Babylonians. And so then all of the Jews are now slaves of the Persians. And the Persians don't really want them all. There's a whole lot of them. And so they tell the people if they want to, they can go back home. And so tens of thousands of Jews leave that area and they make their way back to Judah and to Jerusalem. But they get back there and things don't go really well. You see, the city's been destroyed. Things are really kind of torn down. The city's basically in rubble. And they have a hard time getting any kind of real economy going and trade going there. And so it's really tough. And then another 90 years goes by and we meet Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a Jewish man who was a servant to King Artaxerxes. And it is here that he begins to journal what's going on in his life, in this portion of his life. And we have it, and it is known as the book of Nehemiah. Okay, so if you have your Bibles, you want to flip over there, that's great. I'll have the words on the screen if it's working, of course. Okay? But Nehemiah was an extraordinary leader who did an extraordinary thing. And so we're going to read the entire first chapter. I'll pick it apart as we go through. We're going to read it all at one time. We're going to mosey ourselves through Nehemiah chapter 1. Okay? So in chapter 1, verse 1, it says this: the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. Now again, he gives a specific month and a time when this takes place. This is not a Bible story. This is history. This is real stuff. He goes on and says, they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. So here's the scene. So Nehemiah gets a visit from some of his family that have gone back to Judah, and he asks them how things were going in Jerusalem. They come up for a visit, and they tell Nehemiah that the people there are in great trouble and disgrace. So in other words, things aren't going so hot, Nehemiah. It's kind of bad back there. City's been torn down. Walls have been burned with fire. People are really struggling. There's no money. There's no economy. Things are bad. Verse 4, it says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. Now, we don't have any record if Nehemiah had ever been to Jerusalem. You know, he was probably born and raised, and, because, 160 years have gone by since they were taken out of Jerusalem. So it's possible, highly likely, that he had never been back to Jerusalem. But he gets this news about it. When he hears it, it says he sat down and he wept. He was moved so deeply about his people, his home folks that were deeply in distress, that it broke his heart to hear how badly they were doing. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days, it says, I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, I want you to watch what happens there in verse 5. He says, then I said, he starts his prayer now. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God. That's a good way to start approaching God, isn't it? Brag on him a little bit. Okay? He says, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. You see, Nehemiah reminds God of his promises and his covenants. And then Nehemiah goes a little further, and he begins to confess his sins and the sins of Israel. Again, good lesson for us when we pray. He says, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, so he wasn't pointing fingers, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. And he goes on. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses. He's reminding God of what God has already promised. It says, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, often exile, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. And he says, they are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Well, what a great way to kind of talk to God and pray to God. Brag on him, tell God how great he is, give him praise and adoration, and then remind God, God, you promised this. And then, at the end, in verse 11, Nehemiah finally gets around to asking God what he wants. He didn't start out asking what he wants. He works up to that. He reminds God of his covenant. And then he says, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Here's the request. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. Again, Nehemiah was a servant of King Artaxerxes. And so Nehemiah has this big ask of God. He wants to get a leave of absence to go back to Jerusalem and help the people get back on track with God. Now, you need to understand this. You don't ask the king for favors. He asks you. You don't go to the king and say, hey, would it be okay if I took some time off from work? That doesn't happen. And so Nehemiah prays and asks that God might grant him favor and allow him to take this leave. He's asking God to give him success as he dares to ask the king for a favor. Nehemiah heard what was happening to his people in Jerusalem, and he was deeply moved by it. And he was compelled to do something for his people that were struggling back in Jerusalem. And then the very last sentence of the chapter says, I was a cupbearer for the king. And that's a very interesting and important way to close out the chapter in that prayer. I was a cupbearer for the king. As I said, New Year's is a time when we ask ourselves, how do I make a better version of me? How do I make a better version of me? And as I said, I want us to reconsider that question. I really want us to ask a better question. What is the better question? Ready for me to tell you what it is? You hanging on the edge of your seat? Get to it already. I'm right sitting here ready to write it down. Here's the better question I want you to ask. What breaks my heart? What breaks my heart? And I've been teaching here and in other churches all around the country about this concept of one excellent mission. It is finding that one thing that you are most passionate about, most concerned about, most gifted in doing, and then doing it intentionally. And I've described it to churches as that thing, or discovering what it is that makes you dig deep in your pockets and give without hesitation, or what it is that might make you shed a tear, or what it is that might make you put up your dukes and fight for it if they try to take it away from you. When you discover that, you have discovered your one excellent mission. Put another way, when you find your misery, you find your ministry. When you find that thing that upsets you so much that you must do something about it, that thing that it becomes a moral imperative for you, then you find what God is calling you to do. So the better question I want us to consider today is this: what breaks my heart? When you look around your neighborhood, when you look at your schools, when you look at the community at large, when you look at this nation, what is it that breaks your heart? What is it that captures your emotions? Maybe it's something that disturbs you so much that you try not to think about it because it pains you to do so. Or maybe you look at it and you think to yourself, there's really nothing I can do. It's just me. I'm all by myself. I'm too young. I'm too old. I'm too limited. I'm too far away. I'm too busy. I'm too whatever. What breaks your heart? Instead of going into the new year asking the question, what needs to be done to me? I wonder if we could ask the question instead, what needs to be done around me? What needs to be done around me? If you really and truly want to be a better person in 2016, then do something to make the world a better place. Now here's something I think we'd all find to be true. The people we admire most, the people we revere the most, the people that we most desire to be like, that we want to try to model, are not the people that lost 20 pounds in 90 days. It isn't the people that quit some bad habit. And those are all noteworthy accomplishments, but those aren't the people that inspire us and move us and motivate us the most. It is the people that have made the world a better place that we admire the most. And maybe they didn't change the whole world for the better, but they at least made the world better for someone. They made a difference to someone. And all of us have the potential to make somebody's world a little better. All of us have the opportunity to make a positive impact in the lives of somebody else. If you just muddle your way through 2016 and sit on the couch and change channels, and that's what you spend your time doing in 2016, and you never make an effort to make a difference, you're going to end up coasting through the year, and you're going to blame every problem you face on somebody else. And one thing I've noticed about people, and I watch people, is that people who blame things don't change things. I don't like the way this country's heading. It's the president's fault. It's Congress's fault. It's the politician's fault. Well, let me ask you this. Did you do anything to try to change it? Did you step in the voting booth and vote? And if you didn't, then please be quiet. I don't like the way the schools are run. Well, what are you doing to make the schools a better place? Hey, Mark, do you still like when people from the community volunteer and do stuff at school? Do you still do that?
Yes.
Well, there you go. Just saying. They still like volunteers coming. I don't like this guy. Fix it. They'll take you. Can you fog up a mirror? You qualify. Blaming. I don't like the way that things are going at church. You know what? Neither do I sometimes. But what are you doing to change it? What are you doing to make it better? What are you doing that makes a difference? See, there's always plenty of blame to pass around. But when we are blaming, we aren't doing any changing. Blame isn't a strategy for change. Blame is a way to avoid change. So, I mean, y'all know me. I'm kind of weird about stuff. This is how my mind works. What if we took all that time and energy that we spend blaming everybody and everything for what's wrong and use that energy and effort to be an agent of change? What if? Just ask it. If we were to look at those things that break our hearts and sincerely ask, what needs to be done around me? What could be accomplished? You know, even people who aren't followers of Christ are able to answer that question. There's people that do good things all the time, that make a difference in the world and try to change the world, and they don't know Jesus. But they're moved inside to make a change and be a change agent. They know that. But if you are a follower of Christ, what is required of you to be a change agent for the kingdom of God? Jesus taught us to serve others, and two of the biggest lessons that we learn from Christ about serving others are these. First of all, devotion to God is measured in terms of devotion to others. Jesus taught us that what really matters is how we treat other people. People matter to God, and therefore they should matter to you. John said, whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Jesus didn't just feel compassion, he practiced compassion. He didn't just say it, he did it. The second thing that we learn is that people have inherent value, not ascribed value. What do I mean by that? Jesus modeled that everyone has equal value and sacred worth to God. Everyone. You see, it wasn't that the Romans or Jews were better or worse than the other. He didn't make men more valuable than women. He put them on an even playing field. He didn't put the rich class above the poor class. He put everyone as equally valuable to God. Now, I want you to think about it. Even at your worst, not your best, at your worst, God loved you enough to send His Son to die for you. Not when you were at your best. He loved you even when you were worse than that. Because while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus took the traditional way people thought about others and He turned it on its ear. Jesus believed that every person was made in the image of God. We are people that God loved enough to redeem through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. And we don't just help Christian people. We help all people. don't go on a mission trip just to help Christian people. Well, oh, you're not a Christian? I'm sorry. Can't help you. Sorry. Oh, you're not a Methodist? Oh, sorry. Sorry. We don't behave that way. We need to give equal value to all people. If we follow Jesus, if we truly follow Jesus and desire to be a Christ follower, we can't treat people less just because they aren't Christians. God says everyone matters to Him, and so everyone matters to us. Now let's get back to Nehemiah. Let's see what Mr. Nehemiah is doing. The interesting thing about Nehemiah's broken heart is that it was by divine design. With Nehemiah, what Nehemiah did not know is that God had been working for years before to bring about what was going to happen in Nehemiah's life. You see, about 70 years before Nehemiah's time, God stirred the heart of Zerubbabel. And he caused him to go to Jerusalem and begin rebuilding the temple. And then about 14 years before this took place in Nehemiah's life, God sent Ezra back to Jerusalem to teach people the law of God. And so he's been preparing things all along in the background to finally get to this time where he stirs Nehemiah's heart to go and restore the city. And all of that was in preparation for what was going to take place 400 years later, when the King of Kings would walk through the walls and the gates of that city and declare who He was. God sent Jesus to do what we could not do for ourselves. Jesus came to save us from our sin because God saw our condition and it broke His heart. So now I want you to listen close to what I'm going to tell you this morning. If you've been asleep and haven't paid a bit of attention to anything I've said this morning, I want you to wake up. I want you to listen to this part. Because if you get nothing else, I want you to get this morning. This is the lesson we really get out of Nehemiah. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to embrace the burden God has put on your heart. You have no idea who or what you can affect by the simple decision to act on the burden and vision God has put on your heart. You may never know this side of heaven who you may have affected eternally by making a conscious decision to be a change agent for God. Some of you are here this morning simply because someone else overcame their fear and their apprehension and they invited you to a church function or a worship service. Because of that simple act of obedience by one person, lives of others have been changed forever. So, just a quick illustration. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody at all. If you began coming here because someone invited you, would you raise your hand just real quick? Someone invited you, okay? Someone invited you, say, okay, yeah. So we had several hands went up, okay? Now I want you to notice something here, okay? If someone had not taken the time to make that invitation, how would this church be different? How would the kingdom of God be different? What lives would have gone untouched simply because somebody had the nerve to embrace the burden God puts on their heart? What if they had never asked? What if they had never invited? What would we as a church be missing? So what is it that breaks your heart? I think it's very important for all of us to be healthy. Lose those extra holiday pounds. That's what I told I told Joyce, I haven't even got on the scales yet. I don't even want to know what this past Christmas weekend has done to my fitness program. We want to stop bad habits. We want to get out of debt. Do all those things. Do that. That's all good stuff. Do it. But there is something more to you than that. You are smart. You are talented. You are gifted. And you have been prepared for such a time as this, as Esther was. You want to read that? So it's okay to ask the question, what do I do to make a better me? It's okay. I give you permission. Ask that question. Look in the mirror and say, how do I make a better me? But a better question to ask is what needs to be done around me? And I'm not asking you to do something irresponsible. I don't want you to go home today and say, I'm quitting my job and becoming a missionary. Don't do that today. Work on it. Don't do anything irresponsible. The pastor said I could. No. I'm just asking you to ask the question. What can you do to make the world a better place? Where is God breaking your heart for His sake? Nehemiah wasn't much. Remember that last line? And I was a cupbearer for the king. He just carried the cup. He wasn't anything big. He wasn't a great big leader. He wasn't a man of notoriety. He just carried a cup. But he took what he had, and he did what he could, and it changed the world forever. What if he hadn't done it? What if? And you may think that you don't have much to offer, but folks, little is much when God is in it. I don't have much. All I have is this little Happy Meal. Jesus fed 5,000 with that. What if you don't act on what God is breaking your heart about? What will it matter? Listen. You will change the world one way or another by the way you answer that question. You can do it or not, and either way, you will change the world forever. Your choice. Next week, we're going to start a series called Visioning, Lessons in Life and Leadership, and we're going to be looking at Nehemiah for a while. We'll take a few weeks to learn a lot more about him and God's purpose for His people and God's purpose for you. But one of the things that I think I'd be remiss this morning if I didn't put it out there is of all the New Year's resolutions that you could make, of all the promises that you could look in the mirror and say, how can I make me a better me? I'm going to tell you one way that you could make a better you than any other way known to man. And that is to give your life to Jesus Christ. If you have never put your faith in Jesus, today would be an incredibly great day to do that. To start 2016 walking with the Lord. What an awesome way to start the new year.